I'm well-caffeinated and I'm angry. So let's actually have some fun on the truth with math. And I'm terrified what's going on around here because we're making crap up. So let's actually do math. Mr. Speaker Pro Tem, this is what we're borrowing per second over the last 12 months. Every single second, we're borrowing $72,932. Every second, we borrow $72,000, and $20,000 of it is just interest, and it gets dramatically worse between now and the rest of the decade. So there's a punchline here. I need you to understand. How many times have you listened to members walk behind these microphones and do this? Well, I don't get to vote on mandatory spending. I only vote on discretionary. Seriously, you've been here how long, Mr. Speaker Pro Tem? It's our mantra. Well, I vote on defense and non-defense discretionary, and that's like 30% of the budget. It's actually closer to 27, but well, guess what? Every dime we as members of Congress now vote on is borrowed. It's all borrowed money. So look, I threw together this chart. Thank you for staff. But in the current budget year, the appropriation was about 1.8 trillion, 1.813, and in the July update, we've spent about 1.7 trillion on discretionary. This is not Medicare. This is not Social Security. That's this orange part here. But we're functioning in the last 12 months. We have borrowed 2.3 trillion. Does anyone see the math problem? The 2023 budget discretionary spending was going to be 831 billion. And we're going to borrow when this fiscal year is over. My math is crouching in on 2.2 trillion. Some of my staff thinks it's only going to be 2.1. What's $100 billion between friends? But I need you to process what I'm saying. If anyone out there is listening, if there's any staffer sitting in your office watching the television, understand everything your member of Congress votes on. Everything is borrowed money. Tell me, do you remember it was a year ago? Actually, let's actually go back where I can say something personal. In February, March, I came behind this very microphone and I predicted saying, do you know, I think we're actually heading towards borrowing 1.8 trillion. And I got mocked. I have to apologize. I was wrong. It wasn't 1.8 trillion. We're heading towards 2.1, 2.2. It's much worse. And you just heard the left talking about how wonderful everything is. Explain to me how in May last year, a year ago, May 22, we thought the budget deficit for this year would be about mid-800s, $860, $870 billion, and now we're heading to 2.2. What happened? Medicare costs went up dramatically. Tax receipts have fallen. So you heard about how wonderful this economy is. Isn't it neat? We're doing all these subsidized projects. Government is handing out money to anyone who wants to build a factory. Yay, socialized, nationalized economy. We functionally soft nationalized the chip industry. Isn't it wonderful? Think of what's going on. And yet the tax revenues have fallen actually fairly dramatically. Brilliant economics once again from what the left did last year. And then the third thing no one seems to want to fixate on, that Inflation Reduction Act that they passed, that they were celebrating here. If you even read the left-wing economists in their journals, okay, about half of inflation was supply chain stress, and yes, half of it was the excessive spending. Okay. So the people in my community, unless you've had a 20% pay hike if you live in the Phoenix, Scottsdale area, you are poorer today. You are poorer today than you were 24 months ago. Will the left take responsibility for that? Will they take responsibility for the 50% of it? And this is the insanity, and the wheels are coming off, and no one else seems willing to come behind these microphones and tell the truth. What's happening? Every dime we vote on Because remember, Social Security, veterans benefits, those things are on autopilot. They're mandatory, they're earned benefits, they're a formula. No one here votes on them. It's borrowed money. So the old days when you heard Republicans come behind the microphone saying, well, if we would just get rid of waste and fraud, if we would just get rid of foreign aid, we'll be fine. Foreign aid is about 12 days of borrowing. And I'm going to show you a number of things where the Democrats, the left, makes crap up. The dollar amounts, well, if we would just tax rich people more, if we would just get rid of the threshold on Social Security, I'm going to show you that it gets nowhere near the types of monies they misrepresent to you. We won't use the word lie tonight. I'm going to try to do my best. All right. So we're just going to run through a number of these because I gave away a little time and I only have a half an hour tonight. Actually, I probably only have 20 minutes left. Trying to actually start to demonstrate how fragile we are. There was a bond auction about 5 hours ago, of 30-year paper here, and it all sold at the very top of the market. Basically meaning if you thought interest rates were going down tomorrow, they're not. And you're starting to see actually how fragile we are. We're starting to look at numbers within 10 years. Our interest rate calculations on what we're going to pay on the debt are absolutely wrong. They're absolutely wrong. We're now starting to see math saying we may be missing in 9 budget years from now. Total interest was predicted to be as high as 1.4 trillion, just the interest. I need you now to add another 315 billion on it, and that difference is just the marginal interest rate increases we've had over the last several weeks. When you're borrowing $26 trillion from the public, when you hear the 32, 33 trillion, a bunch of that is money actually we borrow from the trust funds, which are also running out of money. So why this is important? This big red hump here, that's defense spending for 2024. It's like 820, $30 billion. This one here is interest, just interest we're going to pay in 2024. My math is there's very high likelihood interest this government pays in next fiscal year will be equal to every dime we spend in defense. Interest will equal the defense budget. So next time you're talking to a leftist who says, if you would just cut defense spending, interest now is equaling defense, and that's next year. That's the budget we're working on right now. Understand how much trouble we're in. And I'm going to go through some of these fast because there's not a lot of time. But this one is really important. Almost no one here understands or talks about it. It's not the $2 trillion we're going to issue as new debt next year. It's functionally the almost $10 trillion that comes to market next year. We have about $7.6 trillion that gets refinanced. Those are bonds from years ago that were at the remarkably low interest rates. They're coming due. We're going to bring almost $10 trillion to market of U.S. sovereign debt next year. What happens when we bring that debt at these new higher interest rates? Anyone here paying attention to, we've gone off the rails. Oh, but we don't care. That's math. We don't do math here. This is a math-free zone. Pay attention to this. This will be a story as we move through next year when you bring $10 trillion to market. And you got to convince investors to buy this debt that they won't get a better rate of return if they go buy high-quality corporate paper over here, or they should roll over the debt and buy another U.S. sovereign. And at the same time, we're going to be issuing a couple trillion also additional virgin debt. This is where we're at. And you start to look at, we were doing this calculation a couple months ago, that just by raising the interest by a single point, which we've more than exceeded, you start to look out a few years, and by the 10-year window, you might be having a $3.7 trillion a year shortfall. a deficit of 3.7 trillion, and it's mostly that growth. This is not calculating in the new higher medical costs. This is just basically interest fragility. And this board is important to my Democrat brothers and sisters who basically, the comment I always get, well, if we just would tax rich people more. Please buy a calculator. Read some of the documents that your own leftist economists produce, because if we would confiscate, a lot of caffeine today, confiscate next year, if we would confiscate every dime, so you make $500,000, the next dollar you make, we just take it. Government takes everything. So you make $500,000, everything up. So the guy makes $1 billion next year, we take every dime of it. That would bring in about $1.5 trillion. A lot of money. This number's already wrong. Before we were projecting a $1.7 trillion shortfall budget deficit in 2024. Now we're thinking if this year's 2.2, what will next year's be? But confiscate everyone over $500,000. How many times have you heard, if we just tax the rich, we'll be fine? That's an absolute fraud. Remember, the number one driver of debt here is not Democrats, it's not Republicans, it's demographics. The one thing we're not allowed to talk about. We're not allowed to tell the truth. We made promises and we have no cash to keep them. And at some point here, I'm going to set myself on fire after soaking in kerosene. We're going to talk about Social Security and how ugly the basic math is. Oh, let's actually start that right now. And look, some of these, we've put together these slides just trying to demonstrate. On this side over here, these are the taxes you've paid over your lifetime. The average couple. The average couple. The one bar here I want you to get your head around is this orange bar is Medicare. Do you see that gap? This is the benefits you receive. That gap from here to here, that right there, that's 75% of all future debt. We're not supposed to talk about this because it gets people unelected, but the fact of the matter is, unless we have a revolution in delivering the cost of health care, the 130, it may be dramatically more now, that number hasn't been updated in a while, of U.S. sovereign debt that we plan to issue over the next 30 years, 75% of it is Medicare, 25% if we cover the shortfall in Social Security. I'm not going to make you go through that one. So let's actually have some fun with math. I had a sort of a group discussion. Most of the room were people on the left, but they were very polite. Every other person claimed to have a PhD. And we got to discussion saying, hey, the actuary reports, the CBO basically saying 9 years from now, Social Security Trust Fund is empty. It's empty. So that first year, 2033, $616 billion is the shortfall. That if you're an average couple in America, that's a $17,200 cut to your Social Security check. We will double senior poverty. How many people have you seen come to this microphone and say, I give a damn about seniors. I don't want to double senior poverty. Have you seen the stories of how many baby boomers are starting to live on the streets in America? And the projections, this is an article today, and I think this was actually, God, I'm not even sure where this was published. Actually, it may have been Wall Street Journal today. Read the article. Understand what's happening, the fragility, and then we're going to tell these people we're taking 25% of their Social Security check from them? It's 9 years from now. But the problem is that first year, these short, let's just do 1 year math. 2033, that's $616 billion. Let's do the Democrats' suggestion. We're going to tax people over $400,000. Take everyone over $400,000, you hit for it, so there's this donut hole. You pay your Social Security, your FICA tax up to $160,200. Then you don't pay anymore, but once you hit $400,000, everything up, you'll pay the 12.4% Social Security tax. Great. It's $80 billion. The shortfall is 616, but the Democrat solution is $80 billion. Does anyone see a math problem? So let's go on to the next one. Let's do the Bernie Sanders suggestion. Let's get rid of the capital. Every dime you earn, you're going to pay 12.4%. When you do the dynamic score on it, that's about 158 billion. Did I mention the first year shortfall of 616? 616 billion, removing the cap, tax everything, only produces $158 billion. What is that? 437 billion shortfall. What would you like to do? Where'd you like to get it? Democrat colleagues, you refuse to have the discussion how we're going to save Social Security and not do the immoral thing of double senior poverty. But you won't have the conversation because the president stood right there and said, you're not allowed to talk about Medicare and Social Security, and everyone applauded. Because they're going to do attack mail and attack television ads and you're off because you talked about trying to do the moral thing and save this program.